A week before my wedding, my fiancé's family took her on a bonding getaway. When she came back, she looked cold and said, "I need time to think about us." I just smirked, handed her a folder, and said, "Interesting, because I did some digging on that getaway." As she flipped through the pages, her face went pale, and her parents looked like they'd seen a ghost. But before we begin, hit that subscribe button to keep the channel alive and well. I always knew her parents didn't like me. From the very beginning, there was a stiffness in their tone every time they spoke to me, a subtle tension in their smiles, a carefully measured politeness that was never quite rude, but never once felt sincere. They were the kind of people who asked surface-level questions and gave off the sense that they were humoring me more than engaging with me. Her father, especially, had a way of talking to me that made everything sound like a veiled warning. Her mother wasn't much better, passive-aggressive to the bone, always finding ways to disguise contempt with etiquette. I let it slide for a long time. I didn't care whether they liked me or not. I wasn't marrying them. I was marrying her. She told me not to worry. She said they were just being cautious, that they were skeptical of everyone, that I shouldn't take it personally. For the first couple of years, I didn't. I figured I'd win them over eventually, not by performing, but just by being consistent. I showed up when it mattered. I supported her through every job change, every health scare, every holiday obligation that involved standing in a room full of people who never made me feel welcome. I didn't complain. I didn't push. I gave her the space to maintain her relationship with her family, even though they made it clear they didn't think I deserved a place in theirs. I thought that would be enough. We got engaged after 3 years together. It wasn't a surprise. We'd talked about it for months. The proposal was simple, private, exactly how she wanted it. She said yes. She cried. She hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. For a moment, it felt like everything had finally aligned. Her family didn't say much after we told them. Her father offered a handshake. Her mother smiled in that way she always did when trying to hide how annoyed she was. Her brother said nothing. I told myself it didn't matter. We had each other. That was enough. 2 months before the wedding, her parents invited her on a bonding getaway. That was the word they used, bonding. They said it was a family tradition, something they did before big life events. It would just be them, her siblings, and her. A few days at a cabin they'd rented before, no phones, no outside distractions. I didn't protest. I thought it might be good for her. I figured it could smooth over some of the lingering awkwardness between us and them. When she told me about it, she looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure whether to be excited or nervous. I told her to go, that we'd be fine, that I'd be here when she got back. She left on a Friday morning, kissed me goodbye, said she'd miss me, promised she'd text when they got reception. I told her to enjoy it. She smiled. I watched her car disappear down the road, and that was the last time she looked at me with any warmth in her eyes. When she came back 4 days later, something was different. She hugged me, but it was the kind of hug you give someone you're trying not to disappoint. She sat across from me on the couch and said we needed to talk. She said the trip had given her perspective, that she needed time to think, that she wasn't sure if we were moving too fast, that her family had helped her see some things more clearly. She didn't say what those things were. She didn't have to. I looked at her and nodded slowly. Then I stood, walked over to my desk, pulled out a folder, and handed it to her. I said nothing until it was in her hands. Then I looked her in the eye and said, "Interesting, because I did some digging on that getaway." She blinked, confused, then curious. Then, slowly, she opened the folder. Inside was a neatly ordered stack of documents, printed screenshots, transcripts, travel receipts, time logs, and a few photographs. She flipped through the first few pages quickly, expecting nothing. Then she slowed. Her fingers stiffened on the edges. Her jaw clenched. The color in her face drained so gradually it was almost imperceptible, until it wasn't. Her parents were sitting on the other side of the room. They hadn't said a word since she sat down. Her father was watching me like he couldn't decide whether to interrupt or wait for his name to show up. Her mother had one leg crossed over the other, a faint, polite smile still clinging to her face like she hadn't figured out yet that the air in the room had changed. I didn't look at either of them. I just watched my fiancée process what she was holding. I hadn't gone looking for dirt. Not at first. I hadn't planned to investigate anything. But one night, while she was gone, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, an old college friend who worked in the hotel management industry. He recognized her father's name on a cabin reservation. It wasn't a random cabin in the woods. It was a high-end resort, marketed under the guise of a private family retreat center, but better known in certain circles for offering full-service family interventions. They specialized in helping rescue high-value sons and daughters from relationships their families disapproved of. From there, everything unraveled. Phone records, online bookings, surveillance leaks. It turned out the getaway wasn't a bonding trip. It was a coordinated pressure campaign. Over the course of 4 days, she was subjected to constant messaging, repetitive narratives, carefully tailored conversations about how I was pulling her down, how she could still start fresh, how real love doesn't isolate you from family. They brought in a counselor, a family friend, not a licensed professional, who walked her through what they called exit preparation. They even ran her through mock scenarios in case I reacted poorly when she called off the engagement. She hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. That was buried in the back half of the folder. Her father's emails to the resort, referring to me as a manipulative anchor. Her mother's typed list of talking points that included bullet items like highlight his lack of ambition and remind her of X who was better suited. They hadn't just tried to break us up. They had scripted it. When she reached those pages, she stopped turning. Her hand hovered above the stack like she was afraid to touch anything else. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. I could see the cracks forming, not in her guilt, not in her defenses, but in the version of her reality that had just been shredded in 30 printed pages. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Her parents, however, couldn't help themselves. Her father stood up, voice flat and defensive, and said, "You shouldn't have gone looking through private matters." Her mother stood too, a little slower, and added, "You're making this more dramatic than it needs to be." Neither of them denied the contents of the folder. Neither of them apologized. They just shifted the blame like they always did, tried to move the goalposts. She didn't look at them. She didn't speak. She just kept staring at the open folder like she was trying to decide whether she had been manipulated or whether she had let herself be. She didn't speak. Not while the folder sat open in front of her. Not while her parents stood behind her trying to reclaim control. Not while I stepped back and sat down across from her, like I was preparing for a negotiation I no longer had any intention of participating in. The room felt heavy in a way that had nothing to do with volume. No one raised their voice. No one yelled. But the weight of everything unspoken pressed down on all of us. And I could tell that none of them were ready for this to be the moment they lost. They had spent too much time assuming they could always walk things back. Her father finally broke the silence again, this time with a slightly more calculated tone, the kind of voice you use when you're trying to sound reasonable without giving anything away. He said the documents were taken out of context, that I was making assumptions based on things I didn't understand, that families have a right to be concerned when someone they love is about to make a lifelong commitment. Her mother stepped in again, a little more desperate this time, saying that the weekend had simply been about checking in, that it wasn't some conspiracy, that everything had been done out of love. I didn't bother responding. The pages in that folder spoke more clearly than either of them ever had. The timestamps, the language, the financial transactions, it was all too precise, too calculated, too organized to be dismissed as checking in. She closed the folder slowly, carefully, as if the act of shutting it might somehow erase what she had just seen. She didn't look at them. She didn't look at me. She just stared down at the cover for a while, her fingers gently tracing the edge like she was trying to figure out how long the truth had been sitting there without her noticing it. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, quiet, but steady. She asked her father if it was true. Not just the documentation. She already believed the folder. She was asking if he really thought she couldn't make her own decisions, if he genuinely believed that she wasn't capable of choosing who to love without intervention. Her father didn't answer. He just stared back at her like she had asked the wrong question. Her mother tried to deflect again, talking about how everyone gets nervous before a wedding, how doubts are natural, how sometimes people need space to think. She repeated the word space, like it was supposed to sound comforting, but it only made the room colder. My fiancée stood up and walked into the hallway. She didn't say anything, didn't gesture for anyone to follow, just walked out and left the rest of us sitting there. Her absence didn't make the room any less tense. If anything, it made it worse. Her father finally turned to me and asked what I hoped to gain from all this. I told him I hadn't hoped for anything. I just wanted the truth in the room before I married someone who didn't know what was happening behind her back. He scoffed, said something under his breath about me being dramatic. Her mother started picking up the papers and trying to realign them into a neat stack, like organizing the evidence would make it easier to ignore. When she came back into the room 10 minutes later, her face looked calmer, but not softer. She had that stiff, set expression people wear when they're trying to hold themselves together in front of people they no longer trust. She looked at me first, asked if I would give her a few days. She said she needed time, not because she didn't believe me, but because she didn't trust herself to know how she had let it go this far without stopping it. I told her that was fine. I didn't try to convince her of anything. I didn't argue. I just said okay and stood up. I took the folder from her mother's hands, resealed it, and left without another word. That night, she didn't come home. I didn't expect her to. I didn't text. I didn't call. I sat in our apartment, lights off, and thought about the last 3 years. I thought about every time she'd said her parents were just trying to be protective, every time she asked me to be patient, every holiday dinner where I let their sharp comments pass because I didn't want to make things harder for her. I thought about how many times I'd swallowed the discomfort, told myself it would get better, that once we were married, they'd back off. And I realized how wrong I had been. She came back 2 days later. No suitcase. No apology. Just walked through the door like she wasn't sure if she still lived here. She didn't sit down. She didn't take off her shoes. She just stood in the entryway and asked if I was still willing to marry her. I asked her if she had an answer to the question she asked her father. She said no. I told her I wasn't marrying someone who hadn't decided yet whether they belonged to themselves or to the people who tried to control them. She didn't cry. She just nodded, like she already knew. She stayed the night, but not in our room. I heard her on the phone once, late, maybe with her sister, maybe with a friend, maybe with no one. Her voice was low, like someone trying to keep a secret in a house full of witnesses. In the morning, she left again. No explanation. No note. I didn't stop her. By the end of that week, she still hadn't returned. I left the ring box on the kitchen table. I deleted the calendar reminders for the final vendor calls. I emailed the venue, canceled the rehearsal, and asked about refund policies. I didn't tell anyone why. Not yet. There was nothing to say until she decided who she was, and whether that person still wanted to marry me after realizing what her family had built around her while she wasn't looking. By the time the third week came and went, I had stopped expecting her to come back with anything resembling clarity. The silence between us had grown too wide, not because we were angry, but because there was nothing left to fill it with. She texted occasionally, short check-ins. That didn't ask for anything or offer anything, just little lifelines that kept the thread from snapping completely. I didn't respond much, and when I did, it was just to acknowledge receipt. No warmth, no questions, no invitations to talk. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done carrying all the weight. She never tried to deny the folder, never said the documents were fake or the audio was out of context. She didn't argue or deflect like her parents had, but she also didn't step forward. She didn't offer any plan, any stance, any real choice. It was like she was waiting for the situation to resolve itself without her having to decide what side she was on. I had been on one side of that line for years, waiting for her to cross it. Now I realized she never would. Her version of peace meant never risking confrontation. Mine required clarity. And now that I had it, there was no more pretending we were building a life together. I started cleaning out our apartment. Not as a threat, not to send a message, just because the space felt too full of things that didn't mean anything anymore. Her framed photos, her trinkets from childhood, her throw pillows with phrases like, "Love builds a home." All of it suddenly felt performative, like it had been there to decorate the illusion, not the reality. I boxed them up carefully, labeled them, stacked them neatly in the corner by the door. I didn't tell her I was doing it. I wasn't making a statement. I was just making space. The calls started coming in from mutual friends. Some had heard the wedding was postponed. A few had already canceled flights. One asked if I was okay. I said I was. He asked what happened. I told him it wasn't his burden to carry. Most of them didn't press. Those who knew her family already understood more than I had to explain. The ones who didn't need to. I wasn't looking for a defense team. I wasn't looking for comfort. I just wanted out of the waiting room. Her mother emailed me. Not long, just 2 paragraphs, pretending to ask if I was all right, but mostly trying to spin what had happened. She said the getaway hadn't gone as intended, that they hadn't expected it to cause such a rift, that their goal was to help her reflect. She never used the word intervention, never admitted to what the folder contained, just couched everything in vague regret and polite phrases that avoided accountability while begging for neutrality. I didn't respond. I archived the message without reading it a second time. I wondered, once, if she had confronted them again, if she sat down with them and asked how they could manipulate her like that, how they could spend money and time and energy trying to dismantle her relationship under the guise of protection. But I doubted it. More likely, she avoided the subject, smoothed it over, told herself it had come from love, even if it was misguided. That's what she'd always done, translated their control into care, their judgment into concern. I used to think she did that because she was naive. Now I knew better. She did it because she didn't want to lose them, even if it meant losing herself. Eventually, I asked her to come get her things. Not over the phone, not in person, just a message, short, civil, final. I told her the boxes were ready, that I would leave them in the lobby with the doorman, that I didn't need her to come upstairs. She replied with a single word, okay. No apology, no protest, no suggestion that she wanted to fix anything, just a passive acceptance of the fact that something had ended and she didn't know how to start it again. I stayed out for most of the day. I didn't want to be there when she came. I didn't want the weight of another empty conversation, another half-hearted attempt at closure. When I returned, the boxes were gone. The apartment was quiet. Nothing looked different, but everything felt changed. There was no anger in me anymore. No bitterness. Just a quiet kind of certainty that I had made the right decision by not waiting any longer for her to act. That night, I opened the wedding folder on my computer. The guest list. The itinerary. The seating chart we had argued over for 2 hours one night because her father didn't want to sit near mine. I stared at the spreadsheet until my eyes blurred, then selected everything and dragged it to the trash. I emptied it, closed the laptop, shut off the lights. I didn't toast to anything, didn't mark the moment. I just let it pass, the way you let a storm drain off the roof after you've already patched the leak. She sent one more message a week later. She asked if there was still a chance. She said she had cut off communication with her parents, that she'd told them what they did was unforgivable. She said she missed me, that she understood now, that she wanted to rebuild. I stared at the message for a long time. I believed her. I also knew it didn't matter. She hadn't protected us when it counted. She hadn't spoken up when I was being slowly erased. And now that everything had fallen apart, she wanted to start over, as if trust could be reassembled like a chair from a flat-pack box. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to rebuild. Time didn't heal anything. It just made the details quieter. The questions faded, the noise died down, the empty spaces between conversations filled with new ones, and slowly, what used to be my life with her became something I studied from a distance, not something I lived in. I stopped checking for updates, stopped wondering what she was doing or who she was with. The silence became normal, not soothing, not painful, just there, like background radiation. Her name stopped showing up in my inbox. Her number dropped to the bottom of my message history. We became something past tense, neatly filed, easily ignored. I didn't go to any of the weddings we were both invited to after that. I RSVP'd no every time. I didn't want to navigate the glances, the whispered questions, the well-meaning attempts at subtlety from people who were dying to know what really happened. I knew what they'd heard, that she'd been blindsided, that she came back from a family retreat unsure, and I had ended things without giving her a chance, that I was cold, unforgiving, unwilling to bend. I let them believe that. It was easier than explaining the truth to people who wouldn't have understood it anyway. They would have said things like, family's complicated, or she probably didn't know what they were doing, or you should have talked it out. I didn't need that kind of revisionist sympathy. I wasn't looking for pity. I was looking for peace. And by then, I had it. What surprised me most was how quickly her parents moved on. Less than 6 months after the wedding was called off, her mother sent out a family newsletter to mutual acquaintances, casually mentioning that their daughter was taking time for herself, reconnecting with her roots, focusing on personal growth. Her father was photographed attending a charity dinner with a senator, smiling like nothing had ever happened, like he hadn't orchestrated a private psychological operation against his own child's fiancée. They didn't learn a lesson. They didn't reflect. They didn't feel the need to explain themselves. They just continued building the version of the story that suited them best. And in that version, I was the inconvenience they had to clean up before things got out of hand. I didn't care. Their story was theirs to tell. Mine had already been written, and I didn't need an audience for it. I kept the folder, not because I wanted to revisit it, not because I thought I'd ever need it again. I just didn't like the idea of throwing it away and pretending it hadn't mattered. It sat in a fireproof box with other important documents, leases, insurance forms, my passport, proof that something happened, that I hadn't imagined it, that my decision wasn't rash, that love, no matter how deep, couldn't survive in an environment where only one person was doing the protecting. Eventually, I moved. New apartment, new city, nothing dramatic, just enough distance to start again without the weight of old routines. I started seeing someone else. Slowly, carefully. I didn't tell her about what happened. Not right away, not in detail, just that I'd been engaged once, that it hadn't worked out, that I had made peace with it. She didn't press for more. She had her own past. We respected that boundary in each other. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something with someone who understood that silence wasn't always avoidance. It was sometimes just the space needed to heal correctly. Sometimes I still thought about what might have happened if she hadn't gone on that trip. If her parents had never made that call. If she'd come home and just said she was tired and excited to get married, and we had never had that conversation. But that was a fantasy, not a real possibility. The trip hadn't changed her. It had revealed her. Her willingness to be swayed, her inability to draw a line, her deep fear of disapproval from the people who raised her. It had always been there. The resort didn't brainwash her. It just gave her permission to hesitate. And when she hesitated, everything else became clear. The truth is, I don't hate her. I don't even resent her. I think she was scared. I think she was pulled in 100 directions and didn't know how to choose. But the moment she came back and told me she needed time to think, I knew exactly what she meant. She was already gone. She just hadn't admitted it to herself yet. And by the time she finally did, I was already standing on the other side of the decision she couldn't make. I never told her how close I came to letting it go, to forgiving it, to chalking it all up to family pressure and just pretending none of it had happened. But the folder was always there, sitting like a sealed verdict, reminding me that I wasn't the one who tore us apart. I had simply chosen not to follow her off the edge of a cliff she didn't even realize they'd built for her. Years from now, she'll tell someone her version of what happened. Maybe she already has. Maybe she says we drifted apart. Maybe she says I was cold, or too logical, or didn't fight for her. That's fine. Let her. Because I don't need to win the narrative. I just needed to protect my future. And that's exactly what I did. I walked away before the vows. Before the ring. Before the contract. I walked away before the damage became a lifestyle. Before silence became bitterness. Before forgiveness became routine. I walked away with everything they tried to take from me still intact. And I haven't looked back since.